and we will address you if you raise your hand, all right? So we're going to turn over to Dr. Linda Joseph-Massiah, and then at the end, we will have our game section. So we're trying to give her the most possible amount of time to get her topic done, and then we will deal with our games later. All right, so Dr. Massiah.
Okay, good afternoon to everyone and a pleasant day and pleasant Sabbath. I hope your Sabbath has been going well so far. I'm talking to you from Toronto, and today we had homecoming at our church at Berea, and it was really a blessing. And so I hope the remainder of the day continue to be the same. Okay, so this afternoon, my topic for you is aging and impairment of the memory. Some of you may have heard portions of this before, and to others of you, it will be a new topic. I will speak through the session and I'll take your questions afterwards. The topic is very dear to me and personal, and it should be personal to all of us, because one of the things in life is that we always talk about the old people. It happens to old people. You'll be surprised what the statistics says about aging. I'm going to be sharing my screen with you, and let me know if you can hear me, and if you can, so you'll raise your hand and Idel will probably see that, and let me know if you can see my screen. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Massiah,
Yes.
I'm not sure if you want to take somebody, because I see Sister Gardner's hand is already up.
Okay.
I don't know if she has something to say before we begin.
Okay.
No, because she said raise your hand if you can see the screen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to remind all of us this afternoon is that man was created with a perfectly balanced mind. The Lord made man upright in the beginning. He was created with a perfectly balanced sized brain, and all the strength of all his origin was perfectly developed. Adam was the first man, and he was perfect. Every quality of mind then was well proportioned, each aspect of the brain having distinct office and yet dependent upon each other for proper use. And this was written nearly 150 years ago. And it is something that you need to bear in mind as we proceed this evening, because there is a normal brain and there is an abnormal brain. This afternoon, I'm going to be sharing with you some factors that help you to determine what are the normal characteristics of aging. I also want to share with you information about the 7 A's of dementia, because too often individuals are perceived of having dementia because they're older. I also want you to be able to recognize the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, because they are not normal aging. And at the end, I hope that each of you will be able to distinguish between normal aging and someone who has dementia. And the ultimate overriding objective of this session is that as individuals, we will all show compassion for individuals who are different from us. So here is an overview of the functions of the brain, because I knew last week you had a session on mental health, so you had some information on the brain. So the frontal lobe of our brain actually deals with our intellectual powers, our ability to execute executive function, so our planning and our coordination. It also deals with our memory and our emotions. Then we have our temporal lobe that has some of those functions, and in addition has to deal with our hearing and our language comprehension skills. We have our occipital lobe that deals with our vision. Then we have portions of our parietal lobe that deals with our voluntary movement. And finally, we have our cerebrum that deals with our balance. And that's a high-level overview for you. So what is our brain like? The average weight of our brain is about 3 pounds. It consists of 100 billion neurons that are intertwined with synapses. If you ask what neurons are, those are our nerve cells that send and receive signal from our brain. And the synapses are the junctions between the nerve cells that allow them to speak with each other. Here's a key information that I want you to remember. Changes in the brain does not start when you're an older person of 60 years of age. Changes in our brain begin from the time our mother was 3 weeks pregnant. And every second we generate millions or 1 million plus neural connections. When we're about 6 years of age, our brain is almost 90% of what it will be when we become adult. And talking of the frontal lobe that deals with our memory and our executive function, that is not fully developed until we're 35 years of age.
Mhm.
I hear the response. So what does normal aging of the brain looks like? We have slips of the mind. How many of you listening to me at some time forgot where you put your car key? Or where you put your purse? Or the last route you traveled to visit your parent? That's called slight memory lapses. And that begins during our second decade of life. That's in our 20s. As we age, we take longer to learn new information. And our processing and planning it's more difficult for us to execute that. And what I mean by processing and planning, have you heard of people talking about them being able to multitask? It is not so easy to multitask as your brain advances in age. Also, our strategic memory starts to change. And by strategic memory, I'm referring to the fact that we all decide what helps us to learn best. So the way Iredale will learn is not the same way that Charmaine would learn. And excuse me if I'm using your names, but I want to reach out to you. So, but when you get older, it is very difficult because you do not have the ability to organize your learning patterns as you should. We also have issues with our strategic memory. The strategies that we use to retain information becomes harder as we approach 20 years of age. So if you teach someone at 10 years of age the same information as someone at 20, they take different speed and they use different techniques and strategies. And then we have what is called our declarative memory. That is our ability to retrieve information from the past. But here's what research is saying. There's some 70-year-olds who are very cognitively competent and sometimes perform better than a 20-year-old. So what does the literature say about that? The literature says that these individuals are called super agers. That means their aging does not follow the normal pattern of things, and they're still doing research to understand why. What happens structurally in our brain? In our brain mass will change, our cortical density will change, our white matter and our neural transmitter system will change. The brain matter will shrink, and that's usually in our frontal lobe. That's the area that has to do with our planning or coordinating our memory, our emotions. There's also the decline of our synaptic connections. So earlier you heard me saying that synapses connects our nerve cells. So if these are thinning out, it means that the signals that are sent from one cell to the other is not going to be as charged or fully charged as when we were younger. Then the lining of those synapses also shrinks. And there is reduction in the production of chemical messengers. So we'll talk about dopamine and serotonin, and those are, and epinephrine. Those are chemicals in our brain that give us high and low. And as we get older, we tend to become more depressed because we have less of those. And just to say, depression is not a bad thing. It is something that all of us experience. It's just that in some of us, it becomes abnormal. Can aging of the brain be delayed? Does anybody want to answer that question? Okay. So there are some things that we can do in life to prevent aging, or not prevent it, but to delay it, because we will age. The Bible itself tells us that we're young and then we become old. Here's the first thing that all of us have control over: our diet. We need to manage our caloric intake. Do not eat more food than your body requires, because when you eat more food than you need, you store it and then you become obese. And with caution, I'm saying to you, do not go off and say every obese person you meet is consuming too many calories, because there may be other conditions contributing to it. But on a global level, most of us eat more food than we need. And then when we consume the food and we become obese, then the literature says we look 10 years older than what we should be. So if we're 40, we're looking 50. And if we're 20, we're looking 30. We also need to eliminate or limit sugar intake. You know those soda pop that we like? Not good for us. What we need to take is an abundance of green leafy vegetables and use foods that are rich in omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. And you can get those from your seeds and nuts. Then we need to sleep. How many of you young people have heard an older person saying that you sleep too much and you're lazy, you need to get out of bed? What we need is age-appropriate amount of sleep. So I just want to share with you that younger individuals need more sleep than older individuals. So it is okay for an 18-year-old to sleep for 9 hours, for a 13-year-old to sleep for 11 hours. And then it's okay for those of us in our 60s to sleep for 8 hours. And again, it has been found that people who get adequate sleep tend to look younger, and their brain does not age as fast. Then exercise. How often? Our health belief tells us that we should exercise. So I'm going to share with you that if you are a tradesperson listening to me today, and you say, you know, I have to walk to get my tools, I have to climb on the ladder, etc., that's not considered exercise for you. That's your regular routine. Your body is accustomed to that. You have to have another routine. You have to take a leisurely walk, or you go swimming. It has been found when you combine aerobic with non-aerobic exercise that you get better results. And research has shown that dancing is the exercise that provides the best results in terms of delaying the aging process of the brain. Does not mean that you have to go to a club. You can dance exercise to spiritual music. Next, we have intellectual stimulating activities. I should not hear anyone saying, since I left school or university, I've not read. Or, you know, I'm old, so I shouldn't take part in the church. No, we need to engage in intellectual stimulating activities. We can engage in word games, like Bible games. We can learn a new language. I'd suggest or recommend you learn Spanish or Chinese, because those populations are coming to the West. We also need playing an instrument. So if you've never learned music, it's a good opportunity to learn music so that you can keep your brain stimulated, or you can engage in puzzles. And then we have socialization. Sometimes our parents will say to us, we love too many company. But socialization for the right purpose, with the right intent, has very good consequences to delay the aging process. So I recommend that you join special interest groups, that you become a member of or start a network for sharing information or services. But you do that in moderation because you do not want to manage, you do not want to stress yourself, because stress management is important. When you're too stressed, you look older than your age. Age creeps up. You look 10 years older than what you should be. Here are some things, and I've mentioned the diet before and the exercise, but time management is very important. We need to be organized. If we're not organized, we spend time going around in circles, and that can stress us. We need to choose priorities. We do not have to do everything. If you're the leader of the youth department, if you're the pastor of the district, or you're leading in any organization, the task that you can delegate to others around you, because we're not good at everything. Give the task to the person who is best at it. Engage in massage. Share your feelings. Acknowledge your symptoms of stress if you do. And if these strategies do not work, seek professional help. I know there is an issue in our society where people think, if I go to the counselor, the psychologist, the psychiatrist, somebody is going to say something is wrong with me. I encourage you, when you have feelings that you cannot cope with, and when basic diet and exercise does not help, that you reach out to professionals to get attention. Because if you have spiritual unwellness or spiritual disease, you're going to speak with a pastor. If you have cancer, you're going to speak with a medical physician. So why not speak with a psychologist or psychiatrist if you cannot cope with your stress? That has brought me to the end of the section on aging. So I hope that you see the things that I've described are pathologic or physiologic changes that occur in the brain, and they start at 3 months from conception and progress with us through life. And they are not abnormal. What's abnormal? What is abnormal are behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. They're also termed neuropsychiatric symptoms of dementia. These are non-cognitive functions and behaviors. So you will see someone who's agitated, who has aberrant motor behavior. They have depression, that's more than usual. Anxiety, that's not normal. They hear and see things. They have changes in their sleep pattern and appetite. Depending on the severity of the dementia and at the stage when you see the individual, the symptoms will be different. And 90% of individuals who are diagnosed with dementia do not have a favorable outcome. Some folks call it their death sentence. So here are 7 A's of dementia that I'd like to share with you. I know that not every person listening to me is a healthcare professional, but almost every person listening to me may encounter someone who has dementia or dementia symptoms. At a world level, 50 million people are affected. And by the year 2030, it is projected that it will rise to 80 million. That's a lot of individuals. Some of us have this, okay. My slide went ahead of me, but I'll just tell you what was on that slide. So the 7 A's of dementia, the first one would have been agnosia, where the person has an illness but is not aware of it. The second would be amnesia, where the person would have had loss of memory. Thirdly, there's aphasia, where there is a loss of language. And this can be receptive or expressive. Receptive means that the person cannot comprehend. And expressive means that the person cannot express themselves, and receptive means they can express themselves, but they cannot comprehend what is being said. Then we have loss of recognition, and the term for that is agnosia. We also have apraxia, where the person has loss of purposeful movement. Then we have altered perception. And this is different from when we are saying to someone in general conversation, you have no perception. And then we have apathy, which is loss of initiation. And so the first one I'm going to address with you is anosognosia behaviors. Here is where a person overestimates their ability. So they can no longer function normally, but they'll tell you they can. So they'll attempt to drive. They will want to continue to manage their finances, but they do not have the ability. And if you say to them, they disagree with you. They also resistive to care and usually become aggressive and may kick or slap you. And they engage in inappropriate verbalization or profanities and impulsiveness. And just to pause here, because I've heard many individuals say, you know, Brother Peter is not a good Christian because I go to visit him and he's having profane expressions, or he's saying things that's not becoming a Christian. We are talking about someone who is ill, who has a neuropsychiatric disorder or a form of dementia, whose brain is not functioning effectively, and that person is not even aware that they're sick. The person is also unaware of their environment, and sometimes they're at church, but they think they're at home, or they're at school and they think they're at work. They're unaware of the consequences of their behavior on others. They do not experience empathy as a normal person would, and their attention span and concentration span is impaired. So how do we work with these individuals? So you have someone in your family who is displaying this or in your community who is displaying this behavior. What do you do? First, we individually have to acknowledge that and understand that the person is not willful, that the person does not know what is occurring in their life. We need to approach them with a smile, use positive words and in a friendly, relaxed tone. Be non-confronting. When they resist or kick or spit at you, do not take it personal. Just step away and wait and return. Take a deep breath. When you have regained your composure, then you proceed. Sometimes you may not be able to do anything for that person for a day. But if you are resistive, if you use negative expression, if your body language is not appropriate, you will frustrate this person more and you will keep them in that mood for an entire day or more. Now we move to our amnesia behaviors or loss of memory. An individual who is affected with amnesia is anxious and overwhelmed by too much new information. So if you're speaking with someone and they become unsettled with you, just step back and think, is this person okay? They will accuse their family members and folks taking care of them as being imposters. And they will accuse you of holding information. Have someone ever accused you of stealing their items or not visiting? They'll be uncooperative with accustomed tasks or activities. They will reject help and they tend to repeat questions, comments, and behaviors. So if you're speaking with that person and that person is repeating what you say, do not take it personal, they're not mocking you. They also have a time warp delusion. That is, a past memory gets triggered by something in the present and can cause them to become extremely emotional. The strategies you will use for this person is memory aids and reminders. So a good practice would be to have a diary or to write their schedule. Have a schedule in that person's room or in your living room or dining room where that individual frequent, so they can know what the activities for the day will be. So if you're going to take them to church on Sabbath, you make sure that it's written on Saturday that today is Sabbath school. and you don't write church service, you break it down, Sabbath school, divine hour, AY, so that they have a sense of and can sequence the event. You also display pictures of loved ones, friends, and family to keep them connected with their world. You repeat information without pointing out that the information has been provided before. And even with normal individuals, we do this. When we say something and the person asks us again, you say, but I've already told you. No, we need to be understanding and just gently repeat for information for the person again.
I'm electrical, but of course, internet. Let me see here.
Okay. We need to redirect or distract an individual to more pleasant and meaningful activities, and we can create memory trails. So for example, if you're working with John, and you can put a picture of John when he was a child. You may want to put one from primary school. You may want to use a significant event when the person graduated, when the person got married, when they have their first child, and you post it in a way so they can follow the trail. And for their daily task and routines, you need to keep it consistent, because if you change it, then it's going to confuse that individual. And if that person talk about losing their key, this now is not the slip of memory that we talked about in normal aging. This is a real issue. What you do is to offer to help that person to look for the missing item. And now we're down to the third A, aphasia, receptive and expressive. This person has difficulty following conversation, and the language the person has difficulty in could be either expressing it, understanding it, or even reading it. And sometimes they use the incorrect word because they're substituting word. So they may say to you, "You're really ugly," but what the intent was to say was, "You're really beautiful." And so don't take it personal again. You just have to understand that this is what is occurring. If it is your first experience with the person, you have never met them before, be cautious because you don't know the person's history. Or you may be talking with someone who said to you, "This is normal, this is what she says all the time." And then you know that it could be a misuse of words. Sometimes they reverse to their previous language. So if their previous language was English and they now live in a French country, once they become ill, they're going to start speaking English again. Social withdrawal is one of the symptoms associated with aphasia. What you do here is that you check the person's understanding when you're speaking with them by asking short questions or closed-ended question, not a question that will allow the person to elaborate. And sometimes we speak in very lengthy sentences, like when I just started off this evening and I'm telling you about how God created us, and I carried on, for about 8 lines. If you have someone who has aphasia, you have to break that information up into shorter sentences. And we have to keep our noise level down and stand within the person's visual view so that they can see our lips to read them. And we should not talk over a person who is affected by aphasia. What we need to do, if the conversation does not involve the individual, you step out of the geographic location where that person is sitting or standing. You also need to allow them to participate in their decision making. Too often we think when someone is ill that we have to make all of the decisions for that person. No, they're still human beings. They still can make some decision. They have periods when they can do that. So do not make a judgment from the period when they could not. So you allow them to make decisions, and you cannot rush them and expect them to function as a normal person. And your tone has to be supportive. Our body language, they can tell when we're rushed. If we're waiting on them and we're standing, they know that we're not happy. We need to sit. And we need to maintain our normal tone of voice, our normal posture. We should always try to convey an atmosphere of calmness, reassurance, and kindness. The next A is agnosia. Here's where an individual has lost recognition of people in the reversed order. So if you're a grandchild and you visit your grandparent and the grandparent does not recall who you are, it's because you were the last person to arrive in the family. They also view themselves as younger than they actually are. And so they would doubt someone when you show them their spouse. So I'm 70 years of age and you're showing me my 75-year-old or my 80-year-old spouse. And I'm telling you, no, this is not my spouse. And I'm going to go choose somebody who is younger. They'll also deny that they have old children and that all their children are young. They have a delusion that family members, care providers, and other significant persons in their lives are imposters. They display, some, not all, will display inappropriate sexual behaviors. And this is not because it's deliberate, it is because there is a problem with their self-perception and their identification process. They're also disturbed by mirrors, and so the reflection of others will disturb them. They talk to strangers on television, and they will think that somebody's watching them. So sometimes we'll hear people saying, I remember as a kid, I'd hear someone saying, oh, this person is watching me, and they'll always say somebody's watching. It took exposure to this information to understand there was something that was not well with this person, and that person really needed some support. And some of us can attest to some of the information that I've shared so far, that you have encountered someone with this behavior. They're also very defensive when using unfamiliar objects. So if you're going to be living or working or socializing with someone who has agnosia, you have to remember to explain or describe items that they're not familiar with. I'm going to use an example here about feeding someone who has agnosia, because sometimes when our relatives become ill, we have to feed them. They're accustomed to eat with a big spoon. They're accustomed to eat with a fork. But then when you become ill and you can no longer feed yourself, the correct technique is to be fed with a teaspoon. And so if you're going to feed them with a teaspoon, they're going to be resistive to you. And they're going to be very defensive because teaspoon is not what they're accustomed to eat with. They may also have impaired auditory recognition. So they would take a cat mewing for a baby crying. Or they may say that the drumming, they hear drumming. And I know in some of our churches now we have drumming. And we don't know the health state of all our members. Not all members walk away because they dislike drumming, but they may be having a problem thinking that we're having a last lap event in church. And again, though, I do not want you to judge the members who walk away, but we have to be alert to things like those. So how do we deal with someone who has agnosia? We remove the mirror or reverse the mirror. We mimic the use of an object prior to handing it to them. And we provide reassurance of safety. We identify ourselves. Sometimes we walk up to individuals and we don't identify ourselves. We need to do that, especially if the person has not seen us for a long time. And now we move to Apraxia behavior. And if you recall, we said Apraxia had to do with the loss of purposeful movement. And what we have is an individual who refuse to participate in activities saying no, even if they're physically able to do that. They want to, but they cannot remember how to engage in the activity. Sometimes they struggle with the dressing. They forget the sequencing of their clothing. So you may encounter someone who has the garment, say the slip or the half skirt over a dress. because they've forgotten how to sequence that. Or sometimes they're not coordinated in their articles of clothing that they're wearing. They may have different colors of socks on or two different pairs of shoe, or they may have a jacket that does not go with a suit. And I'm not talking about a person who decides today I'm going to wear a beige pant with a blue jacket. There's also difficulty with pushing push button items. So they cannot control the remote for their television or for touch-tone phone. There's also the issue that the last thing they learn is the first to be lost. So we just taught them something, we expect them to retain it, but no, they're going to remember something that they were taught in primary school instead. There's also frustration and inappropriate behaviors for difficult, unfamiliar tasks. And so here again, we need to simplify the process and the steps when we're working with an individual who has apraxia. So what are the interventions? We're going to provide visual cueing and demonstrate what needs to be done. We're going to set their clothing in order because we don't want to take away the person's independence. They need to keep doing things for themselves, but we have to help them. And one way we can help them is to lay out their clothing in the order that it should be put on. We also need to provide step-by-step instruction so that we can provide their privacy during dressing. So we want to step out of the area, but we also want them to be appropriately dressed. And we have to minimize distraction. If they're focusing on eating, don't tell them about walking. If they're walking, don't rush them to go to the dining table. We have to acknowledge that they are not functioning at the level we do. This is not a normal behavior. This is something that is a health issue. And then we have apathy behavior. And this is someone who is sitting in front of a meal and not touching it until someone initiates the activity. They'll spend most of their day in silence, sitting by themselves. And if you talk to persons who are experiencing apathy, they will establish eye contact with you, and they'll even smile, but they just stay in the location where they are. So how do we address this? We have to initiate the activity. We cannot stand by and say, Linda is not speaking, she's not engaged. You have to support me, which is Linda, to become involved. And you need to encourage me. It's going to take a lot of encouragement. That's why you see me having here plus, plus, plus to get the person to participate in any form of activity. And finally, I go to altered perception behavior. And altered, we have a lot of senses. So this one is a little lengthier than the others that I've covered so far. So the person may have verbal or physical resistance to bathing. And a reason for that could be that they're perceiving the water to be deeper than it actually is, and they believe that they're at risk for drowning. Others may want to jump over dark thresholds because it appears to them as a hole, and they fear that they will fall into it. Others are unable to relate to space, and therefore they bump into other individuals, or they may bump into objects. And some will jump over dark tiles. So we have to be careful when we have individuals who are having neurologic disorders, what type of tiles we put in our floor and what type of carpets we use. Because if there's a darkened spot, then they'll take you for a hole and you wonder why they're jumping. When they're visiting with you, it's because of the perception issue. Sometimes they may misinterpret the clothing on the chair or a pole or other objects for people. They may misperceive that the individual on the television is talking with them, so they engage in conversation and when the person is not answering now, they become distressed by it. Or when for some others, they have a tendency to be very cautious when they sit. So you'll find that they will be moving their hands along the edges and making sure that they survey their landscape with their hands to ensure that the place that they're sitting is safe. Walking sometimes can be an issue. And what will occur when there is a perception issue around walking, the individual tends to take a more stooped position. Their feet are slightly apart when they're walking, their shoulders are hunched, and their knees might be bent a bit. And they tend to focus straight ahead. They don't look to the left or to the right, and their head is mostly down. And this is their way of adapting to ensure that they walk safely. How do we intervene? We have to modify the environment. We have to exercise patience and understanding. We have to remain calm, and we provide small bits of information, one at a time. So now you have information about dementia. So I'm going to leave you to do a comparison between dementia and aging. It's by beholding we become changed. It is a law of both the intellect and the spiritual nature that by beholding we become changed. The mind gradually adapts itself to the subject upon which it is allowed to dwell. It becomes assimilated to what it is accustomed to, love and reference. This afternoon, I've shared with you information about the normal brain and what we can do to delay the aging process. They're not foreign to the doctrines that our church teaches. Our church teaches that we should eat a balanced, healthy diet, mainly of nuts and grains. We should exercise, we should get sunlight, and we should have trust in divine power because he's the only one that can keep our memory intact. And then I've also shared with you the indications that a person's brain is abnormal, and that we cannot assume that every person who has an issue that affecting the brain is not a child of God. We were born in God created a perfect world, but we were born in a sinful world where things have become corrupt, disfigured, and we're in a fallen nature. But what we need to do as individuals, whether we be young or old, listening to me this afternoon, is to develop a sense of compassion. And I know you have questions for me, but I have 3 for you. And this is what I want each one of you listening to me to do, is ask yourself this question. What is my role to my biological and legal family members who have behaviors that I do not have? What is my role for the exceptional members in my church family? And the final question is, what is my role for the exceptional individuals in my community? I trust that the presentation was of benefit for you and to you, and I await your questions.
All right.
I'll stop sharing my screen at this time.
All right. We want to thank Dr. Massiah for her presentation. We acknowledge our youth director, Carl Hastings, and Dr. Dr. Joseph is back with us this afternoon. We welcome her.
I heard her presentation.
Yes.
Last week.
We have a hand up already from Natasha. I'm not sure because I'm not seeing her mic, so I don't know if she could actually say anything. But while we wait on her to activate her mic, we'll take a statement by Sister Nixie.
He says, okay, the statement is, you have an unto thinks that everything the pastor preach about is directly talking about her. She shouts in church, "Stop talking about me," or "Why you're telling people my business?" Do you stop them from going to church, or are there ways to help?
Okay, so what I would say first is that you do not stop the person from going to church, but also you have to look at the individual. What is it a behavior that is only exhibited in church? And then if it's exhibited in church, you have to assess the environment. Is there something occurring in the church environment that is triggering? It may not be, because we talked about some folks having misperception. Is it the mic? And is it the lighting? Is it that the pastor is reflective or is speaking like similar to someone that that person has encountered? And so you do your assessments, but at the same token, you do not leave the person, because if it is agonizing to the individual, you may have to use, I would recommend seeking professional counsel.
All right. There was a question asked last week. What was it again? Does being
Those
senile...
person who speak obscenities and different that are unbecoming of a Christian, and they're Christian when they have going through these things, speak to their Christianity.
Okay, so if you recall that I spoke, the first A I dealt with was agnosia, where a person is ill and is not aware, and profanities is one of the things that was mentioned as an indicator. What we have to, I also mentioned that it is, dementia is a neuropsychiatric problem. What I strongly recommend is that we do not judge individuals. This person does not know, and what happens with in terms of a person's spiritual life is between them and their God. I also will pause to say that in some memory changes, people are recalling experience of the past. If you're a physician and you say one is on, a physician is told many things about an individual's life that they cannot relate. I've been told things that I can't relate. A pastor has been told things that he cannot relate. When there is a disease in the brain, there is no control about what memory will come to the forefront. Is that a reflection of the pastor's life? Is that a reflection of the doctor's life? It could be a reflection of the person's practice, because ethically they're bound to keep these things in. And when the brain becomes ill, no one has a control over what will come out of that mouth. So I'd say not judge the person, treat the person with love and respect. The person is saying something that's unpleasant, you keep saying something that's pleasant. Do not reprimand, do not confront.
All right, any more questions from the floor?
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, yeah, I just want to share an experience that I had, and it is important for us to put ourselves in a position to learn. Because when I was working at a particular establishment, the person in charge had to go to visit an elderly person, an elderly woman. And when she saw him, she asked if he's coming to have intercourse with her also. I can't put it in the right way she says it because we're on their live. But it is, she wants to find out if he's coming to molest her too, like the others. And I was saying, how could she have such sort of things in her mind about the pastor? But based on what we're hearing, it's probably something that was done to her. Probably she was molested as a child, or maybe she encountered someone being molested. So now she's reacting it out in her age of dementia. That's
All right, we have a hand from Pastor Hastings.
Thank you, Sister Del Reis.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I want to thank you very much, Doctor, for the discussion this afternoon. I'm a pastor, and
You want to listen?
I would have encountered a number of some of the Adventist patients at the hospital on their way out, meaning they're dying. And, I would hear them cursing and swearing, and I knew them to be Seventh-day Adventists all their life. And I was trying to grapple with a Seventh-day Adventist Christian dying and would have lived this Christian life for so many years. And now that they are having this kind of, it's a dementia, but I mean, I would think that, the things that would be impressed upon that mind would be positive things. And those are the things that would be coming to the forefront. But your discussion this afternoon helped me to realize that, we cannot really tell what will come to the forefront whenever a person is going through that experience. And I think that is kind of therapeutic for me this afternoon, because I struggle all the time to understand why a Christian would have these kinds of words coming out of their mouth after living for Christ for so many years. So we want to thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other suggestions, any comments, questions?
I'd just like to pose a question in here and ask, what do you say to someone who said, well, where's the Holy Spirit in that person's life at this point? Isn't the Holy Spirit supposed to be keeping that person in proper order?
Okay, so my response to that will be, let's just take the COVID situation. God is a God of love. And at the same time, there are people who profess to be Christians who are God's children who are affected by COVID. Job was a child of God. He even left him open and said, Satan, go do whatever you want with him. Sometimes we learn from the experience of our brothers and sisters. Something is happening to someone, and we can learn valuable lessons from that change our lives. And it is not for us to judge between the relationship of someone and their God, because when a person is ill, they do not have it, especially an illness that affects their brain. And so we talked about aging. So we're going to lose some of our cognition. And then that becomes compounded by a pathology or a disease. God is not dead. He's not sleeping. He knows what will ultimately become of that person. We are not God. We should not judge that person. We just pray that and hope that if we are faithful, that we'll see that person in the kingdom. Does that help you, Brother Tom? Did it answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much, Doc.
Okay, I have a submission again, Sister Linda.
Okay.
I think our greatest challenge is comparing saints at those age. I can remember your aunt, Shafina.
Mm-hmm.
Every time she suffers with that too, or suffered with that. Every time she comes and you ask her, Sister Chifina, how you doing? Auntie Chifina, she said, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean unto thy own understanding. All thy ways acknowledge him and he shall direct thy path. That was always her line. But when I come in contact with another person and they're not saying that, I start questioning, how can she be talking about God and another person going through dementia talking all the indecent language that you can think of? So I think the greatest challenge is when we're comparing. Probably Aunt Chafina's life was not as hard as the other person, or maybe the stage of it is different. So we have to, as you say, leave things to God. Don't question a person's relationship with God because we don't have the whole story. Thank you.
Yes, and I've also, I talked about the 7 A's, and not every person will present the same. Not every person, because those different A's are caused by an injury in different places of the brain. So for some folks, it might be their temporal lobe. For others, it might be their frontal lobe. For others, it might be their cerebrum. So it depends on, some may have a combination of, and it therefore is incumbent that we be very careful and not come to any judgment about what is occurring with an individual. What we need to do is to be supportive. And one of the comments I'd like to make here is, as individuals, we tend to rally and understand what's happening with someone who has hypertension. We tend to say, go see your doctor. You have a stroke, we want you to go see the doctor, and everybody is flooding you with visitation. However, when you have a mental health issue or a version of a mental or a neurologic problem, people start putting you in the system where, no, this person is not a Christian. No, it is an illness. And that's why we have psychiatrists. That's why we have psychologists. And I strongly recommend that we use them. And don't wait until our situation becomes traumatic or really severe. When we start to have the initial struggles, if we know our family history, we need to be prepared so we know what to do in the event. For me, like you heard Sister Delarice talking about my Aunt Trifina, that's not the only aunt. I think to date, my mom is probably the only person who died with her mental faculty intact. But you have to prepare yourselves. And none of us know dementia is not about age. And that's why I tag it onto aging. You can have dementia in your 20s. You can be a pregnant mother and have something go wrong with your vascular system, and you end up can't be able to take care of your child because you got a damage to your brain. You can be involved in a vehicular accident that bring on some of these symptoms. And so we have to be cautious and remember that dementia is not age related. It is a neuropsychiatric disorder that has to do with this and is a disease.
Okay. Follow up, Dr. Joseph-Massiah, on the fact that I heard you did this presentation before, and you had indicated that things that a person here, like and the boss in the community, the neighbor, they repeat it. Just like if a person had not a listening person who is listening to calypso or something, but the neighbor is playing it, and all of a sudden you find yourself repeating it. You understand, and you indicated that could be a reason why the person is repeating these things, because they've heard them for all these years coming. Yes.
And then if you recall that I said for one of the A's that sometimes what we remember is what is the first thing we hear. So we're talking about Christians. Not everybody was born in a Christian environment. That person in later life became a Christian, but the portion of their memory that is affected is their recent memory, but their remote memory is still intact. So if their remote memory had something to do with a life that's not Christ-like, that might be what we're hearing. But again, this is a disease process, and we should not judge individuals in terms of their spiritual destiny based on their behaviors or the manifestations of a pathology.
All right, we have two questions here on the board. Do these bad words only come out of elderly person's mouth, or it can happen to younger people as well? The second question is, I know a villager who has a mental problem. As a Christian, am I wrong to keep my distance?
Okay, so the first question is, dementia is not confined to the elderly. Yes, the larger percentage of individuals who have dementia are older individuals, but there are people who are younger than 60s and in their 50s and their 40s who do get dementia. And again, it depends on what is affected, which area of the brain. And so I would not confine the descriptor just to profanity. Yes, we are Christians, so we are saying that that should not be part of our vocabulary. But again, we have to be careful in terms of, because we do not see the brain. And just to let you know, research is still going on and is ongoing to try to understand what is occurring in the brain. We no longer have normal brains the way God created Adam. And with sin, a lot of things creep into life. And we have to trust in divine power. But trust in divine power does not mean that you should not seek aid. And it takes me into the next question about, should we stay from that person? If a person is in crisis and you do not have the skills, what you do is to seek help. I remember years ago when I practiced at home that Dr. Matherin used to have a process where we would have district meetings with the police and other significant individuals in the community, so that when a person is affected or start throwing stones or crash your car, that they'd know to call and take that person to emergency care, and that's not a criminal offense. And then once the person is stabilized, then because you do not have the expertise or the skill, in the good times, you reach out to that individual. No, you do not put yourself in harm, but when the person is lucid, when the person is normal, when the person's symptoms are under control, as a Christian, you need to reach out to the individual. They will remember you for your goodness towards them. Don't run, don't hide and from that person because they have the diagnosis, but just protect yourself from danger. And you can help the person by reaching out for support to them. And they need our love and attention more than the persons who have hypertension and diabetes.
Good afternoon, Brother Joseph here.
Yes,
can I ask a question?
Yes, Brother Joe.
Yeah, is it true that whatever you learn last in the night is that's what you wake up with in the morning?
I'd have to research that one, but what I do say from the topics that I'm speaking about, if we're talking about recognition, in order of recognizing something, the last thing that we see is the first thing that we would forget. And so, but folks will say, if you sleep is something on your mind. So sometimes we go to sleep and we have our agenda on our minds. You know, we have a list, I have to get up early in the morning because I have to get to church. And so those things are, and you don't even sleep well sometimes because you have so many things on your mind. But is there a theory to support that? At this time, I could not answer saying with sureness that that is the case.
Thank you.
There's a question on the board. Dr. Massiah, is there a relationship between menopause and memory challenges?
One is reproductive, but it also has some chemical associations. And the reverse could be true. Is there a connection between childbearing and mental health issues? What I'd say for someone is menopause is a normal physiologic function that has to do with changes with your hormones, your estrogen and your progesterone. Mental health disorders has to do with the chemical functioning of your brain. And yes, I did mention earlier that our dopamine and serotonin and some of our hormones are affected, but I would not walk away and say that menopause contribute to mental health issues. What I can say is that as individuals, some females, when they approach menopause, because it has to do with life changes, think that they are not as worthy as a younger person. And it could be more a personal type of response to the changes of life than to the changes of life causing mental health issues.
All right, another question, and this stems from last week. Does stress affect, well, does someone who is senile, can it be affected by stress or brought on by stress?
It would be interesting to know what that person calls being senile or senility. All individuals experience stress, and some stress is good. We have healthy stress. We all go through that. Even to speak with you today, I speak all the time. I'm on Zoom several times during the week speaking. Yet, I had stress coming on because I thought, who's going to be listening to me? Where are they from? What questions do they have? Will they ask me things that I don't know? And that's normal stress. What would be bad stress is if I did not show up because I was so paralyzed by the fact that I had to speak that I could not show up, and you keep calling me on my phone, you know, Where are you? So some stress is healthy and it's good for the body. It's normal to have stress. When it becomes, and if you recall, when I spoke earlier about one of the things we should do to delay aging is to manage our stress. And what I said to you then is we practice good diet, we get massage, we prioritize our activities, we manage our time. But when we fail to do all of those, when we do all of those and we fail to manage our stress, my strong recommendation is that you see as a psychologist, you see a counselor, you see a psychiatrist, because what you're doing is engaging in what we call health promotion and disease prevention. And just as how we go and check our blood pressure and we check our blood glucose level, I strongly recommend that you go checked out by a psychologist and a psychiatrist for those things that you struggle with. So that brings me to another practice that's very common among us as a church. When something occurs to us, everything we say, go for the pastor to pray for us, get the pastor. Sometimes the person does not need the pastor, what they need is a good psychiatrist. And we have to move away from this myth that when we're not behaving appropriately, that is the devil who's working. The devil is working even in those of us who are behaving normally. So why not go and engage in self-preservation and preservation of our mental health? Because health is not just the spiritual. Health is about the physical well-being. It's about our social well-being. Now I say it's about our financial well-being, because if we don't have money, we'll stress. And it's about our emotional well-being. And it is the psychologist and the psychiatrist, that's their specialization. That's their core competency. The core competency of the pastor is spiritual health.
All right, another question. Is there a correlation between anxiety and memory loss, so that if persons are experiencing high levels of anxiety, they are unable to remember things in long-term memory?
I would say that there is some, you can have anxiety over things that you cannot find, but I would not say that it causes you a mental health illness. And again, like depression, like it is a symptom that we have anxiety. Sometimes we get depressed, you lose a loved one. It's normal to have a degree of depression. As we get older, our dopamine and our serotonin and our norepinephrine, those chemicals aren't in abundance because they're declining. So we'll have some changes, but what can we do to improve those? It's okay to take the medication that the doctor will order for you, or follow the therapy that is being recommended for you. But I would caution you not to take one symptom, one sign, or one pattern of event to draw conclusion. We have a human tendency to conclude, this one is not behaving so normal, he must be mad. This one is demented. And that's why I put both aging and dementia together, because dementia is not the domain of older people. Younger people does get dementia. And aging or changes in the brain has nothing to do when you're 65 and 70. So I was very careful to point out that changes take place all the time. After we were born, no one said that we're 2 hours young. We start the aging process. We're 2 years old, 3 years old, 18 years old. And some of the changes start as early as 20 years in our brain. But we can delay that process by eating the right food, by exercising, by stimulating, keeping ourselves, alert, getting involved. I'm no more saying I'm an old person. I hear folks who are in their 40s saying, oh, I leave that to the younger people. You have wisdom that you can impart. And by imparting the wisdom you have, you keep yourself young.
All right, another question. I fell and hit the back of my head. After a few days, the headache goes. What kind of test is appropriate if there is such a test?
Okay, so I would not recommend a test. I'm going to stay within my scope of practice. And what I would say, if the person fell and struck their head, what they needed to do is to see a physician. And the physician would recommend the appropriate test for that person.
All right, and another one, are vitamins like ginkgo biloba to improve memory, recollection recommended, especially when studying?
Is that a medication?
It's a plant, I'm told.
It's a plant?
It's a naturopathic, yeah. It's a
Okay, so I was going to say, I would ask that person to consult a naturopathic physician or naturopathic doctor, because that's not an area of expertise for me.
Okay, so consult a doctor. All right, another one, I'm getting the impression that we are treating memory issues as mental health conditions. Can a person have a memory issue that has nothing to do with mental health?
Okay, so you would recall, so we have clear psychiatric cases. Those are mental health disorders and are psychiatric disorders. And then dementia, as discussed this afternoon, was discussed in the context of neuropsychiatric disorder. So there's a distinction. So, and my best example of that is when we're ill, we go to a general practitioner. But when something is wrong with our appendix, that general practitioner sends us to the surgeon. And so even in the field of psychiatry, you have specialists. So you'll have a generalist psychiatrist, then you'll have a psychiatrist who specialize in gerontology. So there would be a gerontology psychiatry. And then you have those that specialize in the neuro aspect of it. And so that's why it is important for us as lay persons not to take on the role that is outside of our scope. And if we're in doubt, we go to a psychiatrist, because the psychiatrist will know if they need to pass that to a specialized branch of their field.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
Just a word of caution. Based on an experience that I had, I remember there is a prominent member in the church that actually, when he or she was going through that stage, they were expressing themselves with profanity. And that was a thing that was spreading all over the church. Now, when we do these things, we discourage the brethren, because if I'm a prominent member in the church and going through that stage, I'm instead of sharing the word, I'm sharing profanity or doing the work of Satan, as we call it. And we share it with others, it discourages people. So whenever we see people going through those things, it's not our business to share it with others, because somebody's faith might be tested, or even they would give up, because they say, if Sister Messiah can be talking those things, what about me? And she used to be such a good Christian, or she used to exemplify Christian character. So we have to be cautious. Instead of sharing this information as gossip, we need to go and seek help for individuals. That's my submission.
Okay.
Is there no more questions? Brother Joseph here. Yes. Brother Joseph here.
Yes, Brother Joseph.
I learned that every day your cells die. Do they die and don't come back, or they just die like that?
Tammy, you say every day your cells die?
That's what I understand. Is it so? And if it does it go and don't repair, or what?
We have generation of new cells, but when we were talking about the brain, what we say is that we have changes. It's not that we don't have more, we have changes in our cells. but we have repair. You just take every part of our body is made up of cells. So just think about when you get a laceration. When you get a laceration, what occurs is you have regeneration of cells. So some cells get injured and die, and you have replacement. But cells replace more rapidly in younger persons than in older individuals.
Okay.
So I see that time is now 5:35. I don't know how long you take, AY, but what I'm going to say as a closing note is that as Christians, we have to recognize that we are no longer in a perfect world. We are in a world that we are affected by viruses, by traumatic experience, by abuse, by inept, even our own negligence of how we take care of our bodies. And our very actions and the actions of others around us can impact on the functioning of our brain and our aging process. I strongly exhort each of you to practice good living. Follow the principles that we have been taught. Eat correctly. Get a lot of sunlight. I wish I was where you were today so I could get sunlight because we're still chilly. I'm still wearing a coat. Get exercise. Get engaged with others. Socialize. Sometimes you talk about, I don't like to talk with people. Talk with people. Get involved in uplifting conversation that will stimulate your brain. If you don't want to do that, learn a language. Learn to play music. Get involved in church. There's so many departments that you could become involved with that will help you to stay looking young. And I'd exhort you to take the high road. Be an example of Christ, because we say we are Christian. When Christ was here, he associated with the lame, the crippled, the paralyzed, the demonic. He did not judge them. We are not here to judge. We are here to uphold and support each other. And if we keep that as our focus, more of us will be on the path to heaven, and there'll be a bigger family for us to celebrate in a land where our brains will be intact and there'll be no more memory deficiency. Thank you very much for inviting me home virtually. And I hope that whatever I've shared with you may be a blessing to you, and that you will go forward seeing individuals who are affected as exceptional persons who are different from you, but also acknowledging that that person could be me, and therefore needs to be treated the way that I would like to be treated. Thanks again, and have yourself a great week.